Hello, everybody. My name is David Haley, and welcome to the next episode of Count It Up. We are so glad to be back. This is actually one of our first in-person podcasts that we've done in a while, thanks to the pandemic. So we are so glad to be back. Our esteemed guest today is George Parker from Peregrune. How you doing, George?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. No problem at all. As we know, Count It Up is where we talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, and the sexiest topic of all, inventory and asset management. And so George is we're gonna go back and forth and get an understanding of some of his overall entrepreneur journey, what he does, what he likes to do, and a little bit more about Peregrune. And so thank you again for coming. So let us know kind of where you're from and how you ended up in Atlanta, because you're in Atlanta now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I grew up in a military family. And so I was originally born in Virginia, lived in Alaska for a while, and then ended up in Warner Robins, which is about 90 minutes south of Atlanta. And so just to make things simple, I say I'm from Warner Robins, Georgia.
Right.
I keep it simple like that.
I understand that.
Yeah. And then, so grew up in Georgia that way, went to university at Georgia Tech. And then after Georgia Tech, spent a couple years working in business consulting, and then actually in private equity. Spent a couple years working on Wall Street up in New York, and then went to business school up in Chicago at Northwestern University, where I discovered marketing. Thought it was a really fun, interesting discipline, and so spent a couple years working at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, Ohio. I said, this is way too cold. Way too cold in Chicago, too cold in Cincinnati. I said, I want to get back to Georgia, which is where my wife's family is from, my family was from, and so we had a chance to come and work at Coca-Cola in Atlanta, Georgia, and so that gave me a chance to come back and settle back in my home city.
Very cool, man. Very cool. What are some of your things when you think about all those experiences? I mean, it's a pretty big companies like P&G, Coca-Cola, some very big names. How did that influence you and kind of your overall entrepreneur journey, which we'll get into in a second?
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good question, because you think about it, it'd be the exact opposite of ever ending up as an entrepreneur.
Right.
But first I have to say, my wife also went to Georgia Tech, and she was an industrial engineer. So when you say the sexiest topic is inventory and supply chain, I'm like, yeah.
This is true.
We talk about Gantt charts and supply chain, and so it all works out. I don't know how I ended up as an entrepreneur. It definitely wasn't the career path I thought I would go do.
Right.
I thought that I would get an MBA and then work up to be a vice president or et cetera at a big company, and that was the path that I was on. But for me, I wasn't trying to start a company, and this was about, it was about 4 years ago, come Thanksgiving, is when this all started. Throughout this weird ride that I've had, the common thread has always been running. I've always been a runner. Not a great runner, but I've always been a runner. And as I got older, I had to pay a lot more attention to the things that I ate, how I took care of my body. And so I got to a point where I had a really good system, where I had a nice supplement routine, vitamins, supplements, different things, but I was taking 10 different bottles, and it was just really complicated. So about 4 years ago now, right before Thanksgiving, I sat down and I said, I was a chemical engineer, and so I used to mix things in the lab all the time. If I could sit down and design a multivitamin for what a runner needs, as opposed to the men's one a day, which is designed for just the mass population, what would look differently about it?
Right.
So I sat down, kind of wrote it out. I knew a little bit about what things can mix together, different size of things, how big it would look, et cetera, and did that. And at the same time, I was working with a lot of these big companies, and I realized that a lot of times they're using contract manufacturers to bring their products to life, especially new things, before they wanted to invest in the capital to actually build a product. They would go work with the contract manufacturer. And I was like, well, that's interesting.
When you say contract manufacturer, that's just someone you say, hey, I have this product that I want to bring to the market.
That's right.
And can you help me manufacture, or can you manufacture for me once I give you the ingredients and the specifics?
That's right. And so in fact, one of the interesting things that's different between a company like Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola there's a lot of things different. Like, but one of them was how they bring things to market. So at P&G, a lot of the plants are owned by the company. And so the plant actually owns the company owns the plants that make the diapers, the detergent, the toothpaste, etc. My first job was actually working as an engineer on a diaper line. That's a fun story.
Okay. You made it more absorbent?
Yeah, kind of. And but Coca-Cola is different, is that it's a very asset-light company where they've gone through various phases, but the actual people that put things into the bottle are owned by independent bottlers, not affiliated with the big company that's in Atlanta. And so it's a very different model. And so if the company is trying to create a new water brand or a new dairy brand or whatever it is, they oftentimes don't have a plant to go make it. They're kind of like a little mini entrepreneur sitting in their basement. They have an idea, or in this case, a chemical formula on a piece of paper for a vitamin, and they go out there and find someone that has an existing plant, a vitamin manufacturer that have food scientists on staff that can say, yeah, I can make that for you. And so that's what I did. So I found someone to go make it. I made 48 bottles, which was a 2-year supply. And that was it. That was
and at the time, you were just making this for yourself.
Just for myself.
This is the vitamin. I know 100%. I'm not your average man. I need something a little more kick to it.
That's right. I got 48 bottles, just a white bottle, just completely unlabeled. That looks, people are like, oh, what's in that bottle?
Right.
And that was it. That was the plan. And it had a 2-year shelf life, and so I had exactly a 2-year supply.
That's interesting. And so Peregrune was born.
Peregrune was born at the time.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I decided to put it on Amazon, and that's how it started. And so I put a product on Amazon, and about 2 weeks later, a lady purchased it, and I was like, why would someone buy this product?
Right.
And she's still a customer today. So that's 4 years later.
That's interesting. So I guess, that goes back to the overall entrepreneur journey too. Like you found a problem.
Yeah.
Like, I'm tired of taking all of these pills, and so I know I have the brains and the knowledge in the sense to make a product. Or let me see. Actually, you didn't know, right? You said, let me see if I have the wherewithal to make a better product.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it was trial and error. Right?
Trial and error, yeah. And so, there was a couple of iterations where what I got back was not what I wanted at all. It was either too big, or the color looked weird, or the odor was off, or it didn't have the right mix of ingredients that I wanted. So it took a few iterations. But I think what's interesting throughout all of it is that when I worked at big companies in marketing, one of the hardest things was you have to learn who your consumer is.
Right.
You have workshops and hours, and all your business plan is about who are you selling to.
Right.
But what was different about Peregrune was that I said, you know what? I'm the customer. Can I find another 1,000 people like me in this world? And turns out there are 1,000 people that have similar needs as I wanted. And now we're at the point where it's like, okay, well, are there 10,000 people? And a couple years later, we've sold almost 3 million.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. And so what was and I get this question all the time when you leave corporate America. You say, hey, you have a great education. Now you went to, what you were supposed to do. You go to college, and you got this great job, so to speak, and you're going to leave that for a dream or a very risky positions. And so what was the one thing that made you leave corporate America to give Peregrune a shot full time?
Yeah. My parents think I'm nuts. I saw them a couple of weeks ago, and my dad said to me, he's like, so you have a job yet? And I was like, how do I answer that? I'm like, I'm pretty busy.
Right.
David, what I think it was I could say that I had this dream to always want to work for myself, or I wanted to have unlimited upside potential in my income. And I think maybe all those things are true. But I think what it was is I realized that I take my kids to school, and I would drop them off at 7 o'clock every day for kind of before school, take care. And then we got to the point where I was picking up at 6 or 6:30 every day. And they were now 6, 7 years old. And and they would go to bed like at 8. And so I think I started realizing that we really only ever saw our kids for like 2 hours a day, if that. And that time wasn't really seeing them. It was,
either trying to get to school,
trying to get to
bed, right?
or dealing with stress, or feeling a work call. And there was a time where work was even creep into those different type of moments too. And so for me, that was always simmering in my head. And so when the pandemic started and the company was going through a restructuring and they were offering people severance packages to leave, and they gave you like 2 weeks to decide, it took my wife and I like 4 hours.
Wow,
We're
that's
like,
good.
I have something here that is income generating, and so it can pay bills. Not nearly as much as what I made before, but maybe we didn't need that at the moment. And it's been amazing. Like now I take my kids to school at 8 o'clock and I pick them up at 2:30.
Right.
And we do activities together, and it's just been totally different. And I was talking to my wife the other day because a recruiter called about a really interesting job. And she's like, you can't ever go back. Like our life is so much different now. And we just never knew what it could look like because we've always been raised in a different way.
Right. So there's so many
fingers crossed.
I'm sure you'll make it. You are making it.
We're trying.
You are making it. So walk me through the process of one, kind of starting a business, because I went through this process as well, just starting Countifi. A lot of times you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, right? And so how do you make sure that you understand who your customer is? Because now your customer is no longer George.
Yeah.
Right? So now you have thousands of other customers. How do you stay in tune with those customers to make sure you're still delivering them a product that they need?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you're right. Eventually it changes, and thankfully for the world, there's not many people like me out there. There's a few, but then there's much better people, and so eventually you got to find them. Because I have a marketing background, and it was always honed into me, this idea of consumer research, I try to do that a lot. And so I will reach out to customers that are subscribed and say members, just kind of talk to them like, hey, how did you find the product? What do you think about the product? Any feedback? Who do you like it? I mean, how did you discover it? And I try to mine information like that. I also, when people leave me, so they leave, they unsubscribe, or they cancel subscribe and save, I try to talk to them as well, just to understand what might be going on. But what I've discovered is that by talking with my customers, I oftentimes realize that I learned how they discover the product. And I'll tell you a great story. When I first created the product, in my mind, the core feature of it was this idea that it was a multivitamin and a probiotic. And that was really unique. And I wanted that to be central to the concept because I always had gut health issues. And so I needed to take a probiotic. And my thought was that having a strong gut can help absorb things better. And so to me, the key selling point about the vitamin that I talked all about for the first year was it's a combination multivitamin probiotic. Eventually, when I started talking to consumers, no one said that. No one talked about the probiotic. Instead, what they talked about was the energy component of it. The fact that it was a concentrated vitamin B. It had all 12-ish vitamin Bs, whereas most vitamins only have 1 or 2. And that was their key focus. And I was like, that's really interesting. And so now when you look at my communications, a lot of it is centered on that fact, which is totally different than what I initially thought.
That's cool. That's because you have to really understand what your customer wants, right?
Yeah.
If not, then you no longer have a product. Or you have a product, but you don't have a market.
Yeah.
We kind of went through the same thing when we first started Countifi. We were a mobile application, like a mobile app. We said everybody has a phone, and we were targeted strictly to airlines. And the more and more we started understanding our customer journey and what they need, we don't necessarily need an app in all applications. We don't want the customer or our workers, our staff, to be a part of taking these pictures or recording the inventory. So now we actually have implemented a hardware device. So we have hardware cameras now that we install in hospitals and still install with airlines. So the customer doesn't have to do a thing, actually. They don't have to pull out a phone out of their pocket.
Oh, wow.
They just have to put the inventory that they want to count underneath the camera, or in the airline situation, they put it underneath the camera, take a picture of it, and we give them all the details of that image. In our hospital platform, there's just a camera that's on the wall, and we take pictures automatically, so the employees don't have to do a thing.
So how did you figure that out? Did the employees tell you that that they like taking pictures?
Yeah, they said we want a simple, a easier device to use, and and I thought we were thinking like you always have a phone. Everybody has a phone, so
Yeah.
a mobile app is the easiest way to go, right?
Yeah, because you're like, oh, well, we'll give you something. You just pull it out, hit the app, and then just take a picture on with your phone.
Exactly. From the airline perspective, it was more like, hey, we have very busy. If you've ever been to an airline kitchen, the kitchens are very chaotic. It's like organized chaos, right? Very busy, multiple levels of workers. So they said a lot of times our workers don't have a phone. We don't allow phones on the floor, right?
Oh.
And so we need a platform that allows them just to take a picture and keep going, right? You have all of the flights that come out. You might have 100 or 200 carts or trays with inventory in them.
Yeah.
We just need a platform that's very, like an assembly line, very, very easy for them to take a picture of it and keep moving.
Yeah.
That's what we did. And in the hospital situation, it's more like nurses and doctors and other staff are just busy. They don't want to deal with this inventory. They want to go get the inventory they need and take it to the next surgery or take it to the next patient.
Yeah.
I don't want to pull my phone out and have to do anything at all. So that platform has been very eye-opening as well. But it goes back to your point of understanding your customer.
Yeah.
Right? Talking to your customer, like what do you need, what's working, what doesn't work, because that's the biggest. To me, that's the biggest insight from a successful business, especially starting off. Like you have to understand what your customer needs and wants and what they're willing to pay for.
Yeah. You know what's cool about that story is, you can see a scenario where you try to go and sell a cool inventory accounting solution like you have, and then you can compare it with someone who's selling the same solution but who has done the work to understand. Like, for instance, I never knew how chaotic, like just a simple insight that most people don't even have a phone in the kitchen,
Right.
because like if you don't know that, your sales message, you're like, why isn't that sticky?
Exactly.
My wife works at a company that she used to work at a company that did kind of, IE work for hospitals about the flow of patients through a hospital, surgical flow of patients through an operating room. And the first step they always did was what you're talking about around shadowing. Mm-hmm. And so they would say, hey, let us just shadow your team for a while and you can observe these things and figure it out, which is cool.
Yeah, no, and that's one thing is kind of what made the pandemic so hard, right? Because now you're not in front of your customers anymore. Right?
Yeah.
And you can set up a Zoom call where I'm at my desk and I'm telling you about what our platform is, or if I am the potential client, I'm telling you what we do. But if I can't physically go visit and watch for myself, and my team can't go watch, then it's just not the same, right?
Yeah.
And you don't get all those insights of things that just might happen or might happen that day, that might not happen any other day, or things that they do that they don't even realize they do.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think the pandemic is hard. So I'm glad we're coming on the other side. Even this podcast, right?
Yeah.
It was all we would be.
Yeah, it's totally different. What's also interesting is that the insight that you walk away from the customers was this idea that they wanted something simpler. And you're like, oh, it's an app. And they're like, no, that's not it. It's not like they told you, hey, let's go install a camera up in the corner of the hospital. How did you figure out that would be a better solution than an app?
Because we had really just understanding the customer, doing those shadows, doing those walkthroughs. What we try to do is, first of all, and do interviews of all of our potential staff, right? Of the client staff. Just sit down in a room and say, walk me through what you do. Walk me through your daily process. And then we will go and take tours of the facility, right? And once we do that, we said, for the hospital situation, just like anywhere else, there's storerooms where you have things stored, and then there's like, instead of, as we go into the storeroom or look at their process of them pulling inventory out, no one has time to, they're always running in or running out. No one necessarily has time to write on a clipboard, hey, I removed XYZ inventory, or tell the person in the supply chain, hey, can you order this part because we're using 4 or 5 of them. And so it was almost like a no-brainer once we started. We thought about, hey, I wonder if we could just install a camera, take pictures 4 or 5 times a day, and let them know, like, here is the inventory you have, right? The next thing is, once you have that data, you can analyze it and say, all right, what happened in the last 30 days or 60 days?
Yeah.
Once you know what happened in the last 60 days, now we know what trends or what velocity you're using the inventory at, and then it helps with forecasting. And you see you've only used 5 of these in the last 60 days, so why are you ordering 20?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't make sense based on, unless there's some anomaly that's going to happen in the next month, but based on past history, that we know you only use 4 to 5 of these a month.
Yeah.
So you should be consistent with that order.
That's so interesting. So a similar story to that, when I was working at Procter & Gamble selling toothpaste, of all things, and one of the challenging things about toothpaste is that it's such a high velocity category. There's just so much toothpaste that just rips off the shelf.
Right.
And the biggest loss of sales wasn't competition or not having the price right, it was out of stocks. And the problem is that we would send inventory to a distribution center like Walmart, and then Walmart would break that that inventory down and send it to the stores, so the individual stores now where we shop at, and it would get stored in the back room. But because the velocity is so high, you could feasibly have the store stocked, the shelf stocked in the morning, and it's gone a couple hours later. But someone's not going to the shelf because they don't know it's out, and they're just going through a normal rotation. And so a lot of it, this was before any of those, I wonder if they now use some sort of visual technology, because if you don't know things are out of stock, you don't know to go and just put the product back on the shelf, because we could say, hey, the product's there. It's sitting in the back room. But if you don't know, you don't know.
You don't know. Yeah, you don't know, and you miss that sale, right?
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that from a customer perspective now? From your inventory, I'm assuming you don't still have a garage full of vitamins or supplements, right? So how do you manage your inventory, making sure you get it to the customer when the customer requests it?
Yeah, probably not great, actually. And so I have 2 channels for my business today. I would hopefully like to create a 3rd channel, which would be kind of more traditional retail stores in the next year. But right now, my channels are online channels. Mm-hmm. And so Amazon's a part of the business, as well as my own Shopify store. So the Amazon is probably the more interesting part of the puzzle, because they have been a great business partner. Nothing but great things to say about Amazon. And one of the things they're really good at is that they handle my fulfillment and distribution. And so the way that works is I have gotten large enough where I send all my products, pallets of product, to one central location. And it's on the East Coast. And then they have now learned the business enough to say, okay, I'm going to break up this big pallet, and I'm going to send specific units to 10, 20, 30 or so different fulfillment centers across the country. And what's great about that is if someone orders my product in San Diego, it doesn't ship from Atlanta, Georgia. It ships from whatever the closest fulfillment center is, and it gets there the same day. And so customers are like, wow, they have amazing service. I'm like, yes, thank you. And it's really Amazon.
Right.
But what's hard about it is that I know how much I ship to one center, and Amazon lets me know from a dashboard how much product I have out there. But to understand at a granular level, the different fulfillment centers is really hard to go do. And also the number fluctuates a lot, because what is it based upon? Is it based upon they know what they receive from me and they know my sales, and so it's a simple math equation? But things are in transit, there could be lost, damaged, theft. All that gets reconciled eventually. But sometimes things go out of stock and I maybe miss a day or 2 of sales, which is real money when you're a small company. Right. And it's hard because I don't have, I do have some inventory that I keep at my personal office, as well as a little fulfillment center, and I can go count that. Right. I can go see, and I can see if it's about to run out, I can do something about it. but otherwise I'm relying upon data from Amazon. And although I think they're doing the best they can, sometimes it's hard.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're right though, and you do not want to miss. You don't want to miss any opportunity. I don't want to miss 1 cent
That's
of
right.
digital revenue.
Right. And the reason for that is maybe it was a subscribe and save order that I just lost.
Mhm.
And so that's someone that typically would stay for 12 months. And I just gave them a horrible experience. And that to me that loss to me is worth so much more than the lost sale.
Right.
Because I don't want any of my runners to not have the product they need to get the energy, to get the health recovery they wanted to. If it's not there, then it's not like they can buy another flavor of toothpaste. Like they're done. They have to go get something else. And that's I was always trained growing up in marketing at P&G and Coke that never give your customers a reason to leave your brand.
Mhm.
And for me, the biggest reason to leave the brand that I can't control well is my product not being available.
Right. Are there other challenges? I mean, inventory obviously is a lot of, and we see it all the time, even with companies you think are ran very well, right? You look at that company, even large companies. I remember when I was at E&Y and I was an auditor at E&Y, and we would go through these huge companies.
That's a hard job. Auditing like inventory for a big company.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoa.
I was the coolest guy in the room.
Yeah.
The length.
They're like, oh, David's here again.
But you see all these big companies and you think they have it all together, and then you peel back an onion or look at their balance sheet and P&L and say, hey, this is not together at all. Like they got it all together with duct tape and bubble gum, right?
Yeah.
And so from a smaller company perspective, inventory is an issue. How do you, from the product, how do you make sure that your customer still wants the product? And I talk about that as like the actual makeup of your vitamins. Do you change the recipe at all, or what they receive is kind of the original recipe?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So yes, things have changed over time, and I can give 2 stories that maybe help answer the question. So the first one I briefly mentioned, which is when I first started. So the first one is about not a change to the vitamin, but the change of how I talked about the vitamin. And as I mentioned, when I first started, it was just a generic white medicine bottle. And then I created a label. But that label wasn't based upon anything more than just, this is what I think it should be. But the feedback that I started getting from customers, as I mentioned earlier, was around highlighting other benefits than what I was highlighting. And so the first iterations of the product was changing the priority of communication about what it is. And so the look and feel completely changed based upon what customers were saying in reviews. So what's good about my business is that we have 410 Amazon reviews. And so there's a lot of rich data in there about what people think about the product. And I read them all. And there was a time until about a year ago where you could reply to them. I replied to every single one of them. Be like, hey, thank you, or sorry, whatever it was. But there's so much rich content in what people are willing to say about your product. And so that helped me realize what they were prioritizing. That was probably the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The second one was, actually I have two more stories. The second one was, people kept asking me, hey, is this product gluten-free? And I was like, well, that's an interesting question. Why would they ask that? And it wasn't gluten-free because there was a small amount of gluten in it. Not a lot, but doesn't take a lot for someone who has an intolerance to gluten. And that got me down the path of one of the big reasons that gummies are taking off, aside from that they're chewable and they're fun and they're, they taste great, is they're gluten-free. That's one of the big things. And so we created a pretty good, successful second line of business around gummies based upon calls to the customer service center, emails saying, hey, is your product gluten? And me saying, I could have just been like, no.
Right.
That was the end of it. But I was trying to figure out, why would these runners take the time to ask about that? And could I do something about it? And the third one was, one of the things that I discovered was there was a lot of runners in my community that were, I like to call them not necessarily vegan, but they were vegan friendly, right? And so not their entire lifestyle was vegan, but it was nice to make a choice a vegan choice because it's a good foundation to start your day. And people were asking me about what was the vitamin vegan, is it vegetarian friendly? And at the time, it wasn't. There was one small ingredient that actually came from beeswax. And because it came from bees, it wasn't considered vegan. And so the first product change that I made was about 2 years ago where we reformulated that common ingredient, put something else in there and made it vegan compliant. And that was really good for the business.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it still goes back and listen to your customer. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's the number one thing. And because we see that a lot too, where, and I think sometimes we go down the rabbit hole of comparing ourselves to our competition.
Yeah.
It's like, what is our competition doing? What are they doing? But we had to step back and realize that's not, we have to be competition aware, but we have to be customer focused, right? And so if you're constantly focused on your customer, what they need, what's good, what's bad, what they care about, why they are using you and why they're not using you, I think you have to be successful, right?
Yeah.
Because you know, and you are you're very sensitive to that feedback as well.
I love that because it's so easy to watch your competition,
All the time.
right? And maybe that's why everybody does it, because it's easy to do. You can see what they're doing. They have some new promotion or some new, they need to go do that. But what was the reason why they did that? Because maybe they made an app when they should have made a camera that went on the wall, right? And you wouldn't know that if you're only seeing it secondhand.
Exactly. So I was actually reading a blog post from David Cummings, the entrepreneur in Atlanta.
I used to work with his brother.
Did you
when I was at Bain? Yeah.
Okay.
We started together with his brother.
Okay,
And, one of my good friends from university was his roommate, and now they're partners together at the Atlanta DC place.
Okay, yeah, I know a couple of those guys.
A.T. Gimbel is his name.
I know A.T. as well, and David is a Duke alum as well. So
Oh, okay.
I know him from there, but he's one of the things that he said was just that, like, you have to focus on your customer, be aware of your competition, but focus on your customer. Because if you think about it, the customers are constantly, your competition is constantly posting, telling you what they're doing, telling you their latest product features, or posting on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever they post. But your customers is not out here telling that this vendor did this bad and we had to fire them.
Yeah.
Or what we like about this product is X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So it's only by understanding your customer, having those conversations that you can, I think, get further along in your product development and your company.
Well, he said it. He knows what he's doing.
Exactly.
But the more I talk to you, I feel like I could do even more now. Like hearing some of your stories where, you're like in there. I feel like I could do even more, and maybe there's even more richer insights that I can put together.
I'm sure, man. I'm sure. Because especially you're B2C, right? So you're direct to your customers. I think feedback from Amazon is great, but you post on Facebook on a regular basis, right? And so those comments are also your customers, or what supplement do they not have that they wish they did?
Yeah.
Right? Or there's something that they're missing in their overall supplement profile.
Yeah. As opposed to just the guessing, I can get the feedback right there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another point when you asked me earlier on about leaving corporate America and coming to go do this, one of the things that I think is interesting is when you're in corporate America, eventually you pick a niche.
Mm-hmm.
And you become like the customer service guy or the person who's really good in customer feedback. And so you can listen to a podcast like this and be like, well, yeah. Of course you should be doing things on Facebook. Right. And I'm like, yes, right? If that's all you do, then yes, you get really deep in that area. But one of the hardest things about this journey is I know I should do that and I should do more of that. But I could go have a conversation now with an accounting podcast and they'd be like, hey, what's your tax strategy right now? I'm like, well, I got things to go do there too.
Exactly.
And it's just this never longing list of prioritizing and executing. But to your point,
and you still have a company to run too.
It's a company to run too, right? Like it's just basic stuff. But I think at the end of the day, no matter how long that list is, having customer-centric things being towards the top is probably important.
I agree. So much insight. So much insight. All these nuggets. So finally, I'm going to ask you this last question. What do you wish, now you've been running Peregrune for a while now, what do you wish that you knew 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that you didn't, that you know now, and that you're fully aware of?
What did I wish that I knew now?
Or you could look back at George 3 years ago and say, George, do this.
Yeah. You know, I think I always was really nervous in the beginning, and I always felt maybe like I would be a poser if I was talking about stuff when it came to running or nutrition, because I'm not an Olympian. You know, I'm not the fastest person in the world. But I think what I've learned over time is that you can add value to a lot of people and not necessarily have to be the greatest in the world at it, right? And I think about the years that I wasted just doing things to market the business that my wife used to say, well, you're just scared to go out there and actually go sell or market, right? And so you'll sell online or you'll send out a postcard to someone. Like, they're very passive ways to generate awareness. But what I've realized now recently is, you know, we have our Instagram account at Peregrune, and I've just been talking a lot more. And I get a lot of great feedback back from runners and from other people on awareness, because they're like, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. You've been doing this for 10 years or so. Wow, you were a chemical engineer and you formulated something based upon what you read and what you put together. That's useful. Thank you for sharing it with me. And I just think, where could I be now if I wasn't so afraid to just not be afraid to say I have something that I want to tell the world. And I think a lot of people are scared to even talk about anything. And you might be, maybe there's more people out there that are interested than you think. And maybe you can help someone.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think having confidence that you know what you're talking about. And you might not be 100% correct, right?
Yeah.
Because but it's more about, I have this experience. Based on this experience, I'm trying to share with whoever.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of people call it imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
You're scared that people are gonna say, you don't really know what you're talking about. Or who are you to make a supplement? Or who are you to start a company?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I am George or I'm David and I can do it. Right? I think that's part of it.
I think of your story, like when I first met you, you were saying how one of your first customers was Delta because you used to work there. And I'm like, that's bold to like create a company to say, hey, you know what? Let me actually have you as my first customer. And I'm like, maybe I could have done that at some point, but I never did. And that's great.
It's not too late.
Yeah, that's not too late. Yeah. And every day I gain more confidence. You know, like I said, I never thought that I would go do something like this, and every day is just confidence building to go do something. But
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So there are a lot of people out there. You don't always have to be extroverted and confident. There's ways you can do things. This might take you longer.
That's very true. That's very true, man. That is a great way, I think, to close this session. You've been a great not host, because I'm the host. You have been you've been a great interview subject, truthfully, and I want everyone to go out. And how can they find Peregrune and George Parker out here in the world?
You can find us on social media at Peregrune, on our Instagram.
Can you spell that?
Peregrune. At Instagram, on Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel. You can get some of our long form content. And the website is just peregrune.com.
Thanks, George. This has been great, man. I
Thanks
really
for having me.
appreciate your time.
Enjoyed it.
I would like to thank all of our guests and tuning into the podcast. We're back up and running now. We're doing more face-to-face interviews. So thank you very much. Again, this is Count It Up. I'm David Haley, and thank you for tuning in. And this is where we discuss entrepreneurship, innovation, and the sexiest topic of all, inventory and asset management. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.